Throughout the vast and complex history of monarchy, we've come to expect certain images, grand coronations, golden crowns, elaborate robes, and mighty proclamations. But hidden behind all this pageantry, there lies a peculiar and almost laughable truth, that the ruler of a vast empire still needed help, using the toilet. And from this rather humble need emerged one of the most intimate and unusual positions in royal history, the groom of the stool. This wasn't just any servant. The groom of the stool wasn't fetching drinks or tidying up chambers. He was the trusted companion of the king in his most private moments, literally attending to the monarch's backside. But as we'll discover, the role of the groom of the stool went far beyond bathroom duty. Over centuries, this servant would become one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, a king's confidant, advisor, and gatekeeper to his very person. In today's video, we're diving deep, metaphorically, of course, into the story of the groom of the stool. We'll trace the roots of this strange position, explore how it evolved across monarchs and centuries, and uncover the surprising ways in which wiping a king's butt gave someone the power to shape history. Let's begin. Origins of a royal necessity. The term stool in this context refers not to a seat, but to the chamber pot, a portable toilet often stored in a cabinet or disguised furniture piece. During the Middle Ages, bodily functions were not treated with the same privacy we demand today. Kings might relieve themselves in the same room where they held court. Cleanliness was important, but the task was considered far too demeaning for the monarch to handle himself. So naturally, someone had to help. The earliest mentions of such a servant appear during the reign of Henry V in the late 15th century, but the tradition likely predates that. Known formally as groom of the king's close stool, this servant was responsible for managing the king's chamber pot, linen, and hygiene during toilet breaks. He would bring water, cloth, and even scented herbs to ensure the royal posterior remained fresh. It's easy to laugh, but in an era without modern plumbing, toilet paper, or sanitation, this was serious business. Henry VIII and the rise of influence. It was under Henry VIII that the groom of the stool began to gain serious political clout. Henry, famous for his 6 wives and his break with the Catholic Church, was a monarch of immense ego and paranoia. He kept his circle tight. He didn't trust many, but the groom of the stool was different. This man saw the king alone. He was there in the morning and the night. He heard things others didn't, and had the king's ear in the most literal and figurative ways. The most famous groom during Henry's reign was Sir Anthony Denny. Denny wasn't just a glorified chamber pot attendant. He was one of the king's closest confidants. As Henry grew older and more reclusive, Denny became his mouthpiece. He controlled who could see the king and when. He managed royal correspondence and was even present on Henry's deathbed. It's astonishing to consider. A man whose job involved sanitation became one of the most influential figures in Tudor England. The hidden power in proximity. What made the groom of the stool so powerful? Proximity. In courts full of politics, gossip, and factions, getting close to the king was everything. Being near him physically meant having his attention. And the groom had a kind of access no one else did. Only the groom could approach the king in his bedchamber uninvited. He dressed the monarch, read to him, prayed with him, and yes, cleaned up after him. In a time before press secretaries and spin doctors, the groom often served as the first filter between the king and the outside world. Some grooms were promoted to high offices. Others wielded quiet influence behind the scenes. But all of them knew the king more intimately than his ministers or generals ever could. From toilet to treasury, the role expands. By the 17th century, the role of groom of the stool had transformed into something far more prestigious. During the reign of James I, Charles I, and especially Charles E, the position became an expected part of court life. The grooms were now noblemen. They managed not just hygiene, but also personal finances, wardrobes, schedules, and letters. Some even acted as intermediaries for political negotiations. What began as a role rooted in necessity evolved into a trusted administrative function, albeit still with a strange title. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, there was no groom of the stool per se, due to the delicacy of female modesty, but the queen did have close attendants with similar duties, though usually women of noble birth. Symbol of trust, object of satire. Despite its dignity and power, the groom of the stool was often a subject of mockery in popular culture. Plays, poems, and pamphlets poked fun at the idea of a nobleman assisting with such undignified tasks. In political cartoons of the 18th century, The image of a servant with a chamber pot became a satirical shorthand for royal absurdity or the incompetence of favorites. But the role persisted, and monarchs continued to rely on these trusted servants, even as plumbing and hygiene improved. Decline and disappearance. With the rise of modernity, the groom of the stool faded. By the 19th century, indoor plumbing made the role obsolete. Court etiquette shifted, and monarchs became more symbolic than practical rulers. The last recorded groom of the stool served under King Edward V in the early 20th century, though the title had by then become purely ceremonial. Today, we might find the role absurd, even revolting. But in its time, the groom of the stool was a trusted confidant, political insider, and essential part of royal machinery. Why it matters so? Why tell this story? Because it reminds us that history is messy, both literally and metaphorically. Behind every crown is a person, and behind every person is a network of others who make the illusion of majesty possible. The groom of the stool is a reminder that power often lies not in titles, but in trust. That the most important man in the kingdom wasn't always wearing armor or robes. Sometimes, he was the one holding the wash basin. It's also a story about intimacy and influence, about how proximity can be more powerful than prestige, and how even the most dignified task can become a path to power. Closing thoughts. As you flush away this tale of royal hygiene, remember that history is full of such strange contradictions. Where else can you find a man who cleaned up after the king and ended up shaping the kingdom? From the darkened corridors of medieval castles to the lavish bedchambers of Tudor palaces, the groom of the stool walked softly and carried a very important cloth. And while the title is gone, the lesson remains. In the Game of Thrones, it's not just who wears the crown, it's who sees the crown come off.